Emily's name was barely spoken in the neighborhood, and that was the first warning sign nobody noticed. Hidden behind drawn curtains and silent routines, her existence became a ghostly presence seen but never truly acknowledged until one small observation exposed a reality far darker than anyone imagined. The suburb appeared calm, the kind of place where people trusted their neighbors and children played in front yards without worry. Among the neat houses stood one that looked no different from the rest, but inside lived a child whose presence barely registered in the outside world. The child rarely stepped beyond the front door, and when they did, it was only for brief moments, always under the watchful eyes of the guardians. Anyone who happened to catch a glimpse would notice how unusually quiet the child was, moving with a hesitance that hinted at something unspoken. There were no visible signs of harm, no outbursts, no calls for attention. Yet, there was a sense of distance around the child, as if they were existing rather than living. The house had closed curtains most of the time, blocking the view of the interior. Neighbors assumed it was simply a preference for privacy, and in a community that respected personal space, no one questioned it. Sometimes, faint sounds could be heard from inside: shuffling steps, a door closing slowly, the soft drag of something being moved, but nothing alarming enough to raise suspicion. The guardians were polite when spoken to, maintaining a friendly image that made it easy for others to believe everything was fine. They attended occasional community events, smiled when greeted, and gave short but convincing answers whenever someone mentioned the child. Over time, people stopped asking questions. Children from nearby houses didn't talk about ever playing with the child. Some didn't even know a child lived there. Birthdays, school celebrations, and neighborhood gatherings passed without the child's presence being acknowledged. It was as if the child existed in a quiet shadow, unnoticed by those around them. Each day followed the same silent routine, with no signs of joy or normal childhood exploration. While other children rode bicycles or laughed on sidewalks, that single house remained still, untouched by the sound of laughter or the chaos of youth. Everything about it suggested control, routine, and a carefully maintained image. The unsettling part was how easy it was for everyone to accept the surface-level normalcy. The child's absence from everyday moments became just another detail people overlooked. The house blended into the scenery, its secret safely hidden behind a facade of normal life. If someone had looked closer, they might have noticed how silence itself had settled into the walls of that home like a permanent resident. But in a place where everything appeared peaceful, few imagined that behind one quiet door, a childhood was slowly disappearing unnoticed. At school, the child moved like a shadow through the hallways. They attended classes, but never truly seemed present. Teachers marked attendance and handed out assignments, noticing that the child completed tasks mechanically, without any hint of personal expression. Written work was always neat, almost too precise, as if completed out of obligation rather than understanding. When asked to share opinions or participate, the child remained silent, eyes lowered, body tense. While other students showed excitement or frustration over small things, the child displayed no visible reaction to anything. It was as though every emotion had been carefully tucked away, hidden beneath layers of fear that no one could see clearly. School staff noted unusual patterns. Lunchboxes often returned untouched. The child never brought personal items, no toys, no decorated notebooks, nothing that hinted at individual interests. Even during group projects, they stood slightly apart, never making eye contact and waiting for instructions rather than contributing ideas. Some teachers felt a quiet concern, sensing that something was wrong, but without clear evidence or dramatic incidents. The worry faded into the background. The guardians always responded quickly to school messages, using polite words and steady explanations. They claimed the child struggled with social anxiety and preferred to be left alone. Those answers were accepted, and the routine continued. Over time, absenteeism began. At first, it was a few days missed with notes explaining illness. Then the gaps became longer. Each time, paperwork was filed, and the pattern repeated. No one pushed further, partly because the child never caused disruptions or discipline issues. They were quiet, compliant, and easy to overlook in a busy environment focused on more visible problems. A sense of normality wrapped around the case, preventing anyone from looking too closely. The child slipped further into isolation, even in a place designed for connection and learning. In the playground, children ran and shouted, forming temporary friendships through games and laughter. The child stood at a distance, not participating, watching with a detached expression. There were moments when it seemed they wanted to step forward, to join in, but something unseen held them back. The world moved around them, bright and loud, while they remained still in the center of it all. Every day they returned home without anyone truly noticing how deeply alone they were. What looked like simple shyness was, in reality, a sign of something far more serious forming beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Everything began to change on an ordinary afternoon when a delivery worker approached the house. They noticed something unusual, not loud, not chaotic, just a faint, unsettling sound from inside. It wasn't clear enough to identify, but it carried a tone that didn't match the quiet exterior the neighborhood had grown used to. The worker hesitated for a moment, sensing something was off, a kind of tension in the air that words couldn't fully explain. They completed the delivery, but left with a lingering feeling that something inside that home was not right, a feeling strong enough to mention to their supervisor. That single comment, made out of instinct rather than certainty, set a chain of events into motion. A welfare check was scheduled, initially viewed as a routine procedure. When authorities arrived, the guardians cooperated without resistance. They maintained a calm demeanor, answering questions with confidence. The house was clean, organized, and carefully presented. Surfaces were spotless, rooms neatly arranged, and everything placed with careful intention. At first glance, nothing suggested harm or neglect. Yet, there was a stillness that felt controlled, as if the house was prepared for inspection rather than lived in. Naturally, the smell of cleaning products lingered in the air, stronger than expected for an average household. During the visit, an officer casually asked about the child's personal space. The guardians showed a small bedroom, sparsely decorated, containing only the essentials. There were no signs of hobbies, no drawings on the walls, no personal belongings that reflected a young life growing and exploring. It looked like a space meant for sleeping, not living. On the way out, an officer noticed a locked door near the back of the house. When asked about it, the guardians explained it was a private storage area, not suitable for visitors. Their explanation was smooth and delivered without hesitation, but the brief moment of tension in their tone was enough to raise suspicion. The officers couldn't force entry without proper authorization, so they documented the observation and left. Still, something about that locked space lingered in their minds. It wasn't just the door itself, it was the way the atmosphere shifted when it was mentioned, as if an invisible line had been crossed. What was meant to be a simple check now felt like the start of something much more serious. For the first time, the image of a quiet, normal household had a visible crack, and what lay behind it promised to be far more disturbing than anyone expected. Investigators began a deeper review, starting with school reports, medical records, and past home visits. What had once seemed like minor inconsistencies now formed a concerning pattern. The guardians had provided different explanations to different authorities over time, each one believable on its own, but contradictory when placed side by side. Attendance records showed repeated absences marked as illness, yet no recent medical evaluations existed. There were also gaps where no explanation had been officially filed, just quiet acceptance from the system. The further the investigators looked, the more it became clear that this household had carefully maintained an image designed to prevent closer inspection. With growing concern, Child Protection Services formally requested access to the entire property. This time, they arrived with legal authority to inspect every room, including the locked area previously dismissed as storage. The guardians hesitated, but had no choice but to comply. As the team moved through the house, they noted a striking absence of anything that reflected normal family life. There were no signs of celebration, no family photos, no scattered items that would suggest laughter or warmth ever filled the space. Everything felt orderly in a way that suggested control rather than care. When the locked door was finally opened, the tension inside the house shifted noticeably. The room beyond it was cold and nearly empty, lacking comfort or personal touches. It felt more like a space meant to contain rather than to shelter. There were signs that the child had spent long periods there, subtle but unmistakable indicators of isolation. Even without physical harm visible, the emotional impact of the environment was clear. The atmosphere carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. Investigators understood immediately that this was not simply a case of strict parenting or social withdrawal. This was deliberate separation from normal life. The child was quietly removed from the home during the investigation. They didn't resist, didn't look back, and didn't show any confusion, which concerned the team even more. A child who had been isolated for so long had learned not to expect help, and that silence spoke louder than any visible injury ever could. As the guardians were taken into custody for questioning, the house remained eerily still behind them, holding the remnants of a life that had been hidden in plain sight. The case shifted from suspicion to confirmed neglect, and the community that once walked past that house without a second thought now had to confront the reality that something so serious had been unfolding right among them. News spread quickly through the neighborhood, and a heavy silence settled over the streets that once felt so welcoming. People who had lived nearby for years began to replay past moments in their minds, trying to recall any sign they might have missed. Many remembered the quiet child but realized they had never truly looked. There had been no birthdays celebrated on the lawn, no school friends visiting, no laughter drifting through open windows. These things had seemed ordinary at the time, easily dismissed, but now they stood out as unsettling gaps that pointed to a much darker reality. The realization that a child had suffered so deeply, so close by, created a sense of collective unease that was hard to shake. The guardians faced legal action as investigators presented a timeline of control, emotional neglect, and intentional isolation. Court discussions focused not on visible harm but on the psychological impact of being cut off from the world. Experts explained how long-term emotional deprivation leaves marks that cannot be seen but shape a person's life forever. The child, now placed in professional care, struggled to adjust to a new environment where freedom and kindness were offered. Simple gestures, like being asked about personal preferences or being allowed to make small choices, felt unfamiliar and overwhelming. Recovery would not follow a predictable path, and progress would be measured in the smallest steps. Therapists worked slowly, understanding that healing from silence takes time. The child began to observe others more closely, watching how people communicated and laughed freely. There were moments of hesitation when offered comfort, as if unsure whether it was safe to accept. Over time, tiny responses began to appear, slight changes in posture, small glances toward others, and brief moments of curiosity about the world outside. These moments were recorded carefully, celebrated quietly by those responsible for the child's well-being. Each step forward was a reminder of the life that had been suppressed for so long. The case became widely discussed in schools, training sessions, and community programs. It was used as a reminder that abuse is not always loud or visible. A child can be harmed through isolation just as deeply as through any physical act. People who had once walked past the house without a second thought now understood the danger of assuming everything is fine simply because nothing appears wrong. The story remained a lasting lesson, urging others to look closer, listen more carefully, and never ignore a quiet child who seems to fade into the background. In the quiet spaces where no one is watching, pain can go unnoticed for years, and that truth made this case one of the most haunting the community had ever faced.